because the structures in the society are changing, rolling back. And they both seem to think that multi-ethnic organizing is part and parcel of Korean American empowerment. Are there any questions? Yes. Can you tell us where you're from? I don't know how we're going to do with this mic. Can you come up to the front to the podium and ask your question?
No, I'd like to say that here.
Stand up. Stand up.
You mentioned a lot about, my name is Max, I'm from New York. And joined, I guess I'm part of the biker union. Anyway, the question I have is, you mentioned a lot about Korean American community and its involvement and empowerment, but, and you mentioned a lot of parallels between the civil rights of a lot of other ethnic communities and our community. But I think that our community is a little bit different, that we're like very young community, and also that we are of a different culture. So I just wanted to know, and if I could pose that to you and to see what your response to that would be.
Who did you pose to?
Anybody.
지금 질문이 지금 우리 현재 그 미국에서 사는 우리 코리안 아메리칸들이 다른 소수민족들하고는 같은 점들이 있지만은 내가 생각하기는 굉장히 다르다고 생각한다. 거기에 대해서 좀 더 보태줬으면 좋겠다고 말씀드렸어요.
I guess you're talking about the Korean American second generation community. Is that right?
I just think that Korean American community as a whole, I guess second generation, if you would like to, just direct it at that.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the Korean immigrant generation itself is pretty young. When I came to the state in 1975, we moved into New York, and there were that many Koreans then at the time. And after 2 years, there's like more than 100,000 Koreans in the city. So it's only been last 30 years or so that Korean immigrants appeared in American landscape, so to speak, in large numbers. So you're right, we're pretty young. And the average age, for example, of second generation Korean American is around 10 years old. So that's an indication of how young you are. But I guess that sort of youth, so to speak, of a community could work both against us or for us, because of the fact that the community is very young, that we're not that familiar with the political process, political participation of this society can work against us. But that's something we can improve and overcome through education. But on the other hand, the immigrant community, because of this hardship that it has gone through, brings a very, very dynamic energy. Without that energy, could not survive. So on the other hand, that sort of youth in the community can work for us, having that very, very vigorous energy. And the question is, how do you tap that energy? How do you tap that forces, and how to organize that? And in terms of Korean American community, and as I said, that there's real differences between the first generation Korean immigrant community and second generation Korean American community. And there is even questions whether how well formed that second generation community is. But however, I mean, there does exist differences, and the cultural identity issues and the community involvement, politics are all very different for those different sides of that community generation gap. So that there is no one single thing we can say, saying that this is a Korean community or this is a Korean American community, and this is what we have to do. What I talked about is more of a general overall characteristics, and for each community that we need to learn. I think one of the things in the community now is that although we talk about political empowerment a lot, not many people really know what communities is like. There has never been any serious study nationwide done on the various aspects of Korean immigrant life or Korean American life. There has not been any survey or primary data collected on that, and that's something we need to do to learn from the community. You could not possibly go around million Korean American population in any reasonable time, but we can do scientific study on it, and we need to figure out where our community is at, and what our second generation Korean community is, and where they are at, and where the Korean immigrant community is. So I think, and not only that, as I said, that there needs to be effort on both sides to understand each other. You could never organize community without understanding people. So there has to be really serious and sincere efforts on both sides of the generation gap to understand each other. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Can I briefly try to answer? I think it depends on whether you view this as a glass half empty or half full. Obviously, there are cultural linguistic differences, but the real challenge upon us is what are we going to do despite the differences. Therefore, we must establish a common ground based on the historical facts, history of oppression, being the minority and being different, being the other in American context. So I think we need to try to establish some common grounds despite the differences, and the linguistic, cultural, and identity differences are given. We are not going to be able to change that at all. And that's why we are here today, to try to strategize what to do in the future.
Yes.
I have a very general question, and hopefully a simple question, and this notion of civil rights. What are civil rights in the Korean American context? You can provide some examples of civil rights for the Korean American community. And the second part of the question is that people are saying that civil rights are being endangered. So the question is, what kind of civil rights do we have to fight for in the upcoming years?
Which one? 지금 그 질문한 것이 지금 민권이라는 말을 상당히 많이 썼는데, 과연 그 민권이라는 것이 우리 한인 사회에서 무엇을 의미하는가, 그것을 한 질문을 하셨고요. 또 하나는 두 번째 질문은 뭐였지? 이제 민권을 우리가 상당히 많이 지금 침해당하고 있다, 이런 표현을 많이 하고 있는데, 구체적으로 무엇을, 어떤 사례들이 있는지, 또 무엇을 의미하는지 그 두 가지 질문을 했습니다. 정민 씨 해주겠습니다. 그래서 제가 몰라서 또 옆으로 넘기려고 그랬더니 안 되겠는데, 글쎄요, 그 민권이라는 것 자체가 상당히 뭐다라고 얘기는 상당히 곤란하겠죠. 무엇이다라고 얘기는 힘들지만은, 최소한 미국이라는 사회에서 법적인 보호를 받을 수 있는 권리는 있지 않겠는가. 특히 미국이라는 나라는 민주주의를 표명하면서 민주주의를 수호한다는 미명 아래 다른 나라를 침략을 했고, 전쟁을 일으켰고 그러한 그 베이직 프레미스, 그 기초가 다르지 않습니까? 딴 나라는 우리 한국 같은 경우는 5,000년의 역사를 자랑한다고 그러고 유럽이나 아프리카 다른 여러 나라도 그 역사가 있는데 그 나라들은 뭐 왕정사가 있고 어떤 그 시민을 착취한 그런 역사들이 있지만 미국이라는 나라는 처음부터 그 민주주의라는 그런 표현을 썼습니다. 만인은 평등하다는 그런 표현을 썼습니다. 따라서 미국 우리가 항상 이런 얘기 할 때 보면 딴 나라랑 비교해서 미국이 딴 나라보다 낫다 이런 말들을 상당히 많이 하는데 저는 그거는 잘못된 비교라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 우리가 미국에 살고 있기 때문에 미국 법이 보장해주는 그런 법적인 보호를 받을 권리가 있는 것이고 또 그것을 넘어서서 우리가 어떤 동등한 인간 대접을 받을 수 있는 것이 바로 민권이 아닌가. 그렇지만 이 나라는 아무래도 그 레이셜라이즈 되어 있기 때문에 이 인종이라는 개념 자체가 너무나 깊은 뿌리를 갖고 있고 백인을 위한 백인의 사회였기 때문에 여태까지 그 지배자적인 입장에서 모든 것이 정의가 내려졌고 그 소수민족이 갖는 소수민족에 대한 어떤 압박 또는 그 착취가 하나의 어떤 그 거부감 없이 받아들여 와졌던 것이 바로 민권운동사 이전의 역사입니다. 하지만 민권운동이 시작된 이후부터는 소수민족에 대한 어떠한 민권 보장이라는 민권을 정의 내리면서 자꾸 민권이라는 말을 쓰니까 이게 좀 문제가 되는데 그런 것을 의미하지 않는가 제 나름대로 그렇게 생각을 해보고요. 두 번째는 대답할 수 있어요? 자꾸 말이 길어지는 것 같아서 두 번째로 그 민권에 대한 그 구체적인 사례 뭐 요즘 그 우리 한인들이 경찰에 대한 폭행 당하는 것들 보면은 뭐 저게 라드니 킹 케이스하고 뭐 다를 게 무엇이 있냐 만약에 그 사람들이 피해자들이 백인이었다 그러면은 그러한 그 무작정의 그런 폭행을 당했겠는가 그런 거 등등해서 아마 민권 침해 사례는 굉장히 많다고 저는 생각이 됩니다. Well, the question about what is civil rights for Korean American community is obviously a very vague and elusive concept, it can be, but within the context of the United States of America, which was founded based on the principle of equality and justice for all, I strongly believe that everyone in this country, whether you are legal or undocumented, has a right to be treated as an equal human being. So we should demand equal protection under the law. I think that's the given concept for civil rights. But it needs to go beyond that. Not only because the United States was founded in the principle of democracy, but because we're human beings. I think every human being, whether you have a document or not, should be treated as a human being. I think that's what civil rights is all about, and we need to protect them. Second question about can I provide any specific examples whether how and Korean Americans been violated the human rights or the civil rights. There have been numerous cases recently, for example, I think during the last 3-4 months, 3 or 4 Korean Americans been brutally beaten by police. I mean, those are the very clear examples of how the Korean Americans' human rights and civil rights are being violated because they don't look like persons. I mean, that's the only reason why they're severely beaten. And I think that's some of the examples of a violation of civil rights.
Thank you. We will have to end the question and answer period right now because we are a little bit behind time. We will take a 10-minute break right now. It is now 10 minutes to 6, and we will try to be back here at 6 o'clock. Thank you for your patience. Speakers. We will hear from Angela Sombrano first, and then Chung Hwa-ho. And we also, in the interest of moving us forward, at the question and answer period, we will stay with the language that the question is given and not translated into the other language. So in other words, if the question comes to us in Korean, we will let it be in Korean and not translated into English and vice versa. We would like to welcome our next speaker, Angela Zambrano. She is currently the acting executive director of Central American Center. It's called CARASAN. It is an organization working for the empowerment of Central American and Latinos living in Los Angeles. Angela is also a longtime activist in the El Salvador movement. She was the elected executive director of the organization we have known as CISPES, Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. She is also a former co-chair of Sane Freeze, which is one of the largest peace and disarmament organizations in the United States. Angela will give us a presentation on multi-ethnic coalition building.
네, 여러분들 잘 쉬셨는지 모르겠네요. 저희 먼저 스피커로 얘기하시려고 하셨는데요. 저희가 먼저 안젤라 산브라노 씨를 먼저 스피커로 모시고요. 그 다음에 홍정아님이 연설을 해주시겠고요. 저 죄송한 말씀인데 저희가 계속 이중 언어로 이제 해왔지 않습니까? 근데 약간 시간이 모자라가지고요. 영어로 질문이 들어오면 영어로 대답을 하고 우리말로 질문이 들어오면 우리말로 하겠습니다. 질문하시는 분이 두 가지 다 하게 되면 두 가지 다 하게 되겠죠. 그리고 지금 저희가 소개해드릴 분은요, 안젤라 산브라노 씨인데요. 여러분 그 책자에 다 자세히 설명이 나와 있는데요. 지금 변호사로 계시고요. 현재 중남미 센터에서 사무국장 대행으로 일하고 계십니다. 그리고 85년에 엘살바도르 연대위원회에서 사무국장으로 선출돼 봐 있고요. 그거는 저희가 시스페스라고 잘 알려져 있는 그런 단체죠. 그리고 또한 미국에서 가장 큰 평화군축 단체인 세인프리즈에서 공동의장으로 활동하신 바 있고요. 저희가 오늘 부탁드린 그 주제는요, 소수민족 커뮤니티 연대를 위하여입니다. 여러분 박수로 청해 주시기 바랍니다.
Good afternoon. It is an honor and a privilege for me to have the opportunity to speak at NASACA's second anniversary conference. I feel at home because I see a lot of friends, Chang Wall and many other Korean friends that I had the opportunity to work with in Washington, D.C. in the mid-'80s and later part of the '80s. When I worked with CISPES as the national director of CISPES. It is of great importance that NACASEC decided to hold its second annual conference in Los Angeles because it is precisely here in Los Angeles where the debate and policies that impact the Korean people and people of color at the national level are being spearheaded. Having your conference here in Los Angeles sends a strong message to California and the nation that the Korean community will not be intimidated by bigotry and racism, and that the Korean community is prepared to defend the civil rights of the Korean people and people of color. Your example and courage is an inspiration to all of us in the Latino community. The cuts of welfare benefits to the poor and legal immigrants is the most recent example of the unjust and unfair treatment and blatant discrimination against the immigrant community. There are 310,000 non-citizens on SSI in California. Many of these are elderly blind, and disabled who have worked for many years and have contributed to the Social Security system. In fact, immigrants contribute 29 billion more than they receive in social benefits. And it seems to me that this raises the fundamental question that started the revolution in this country, which is taxation without representation. These policies would only result in broadening the gap between the rich and the poor, and will create an underclass of an apartheid-like system in the United States that will undermine the social, political, and economic well-being of the society as a whole. Vicious and racist attacks against immigrants and the poor are not new in American history. And to understand the present is very important that we study and understand the past. In fact, the continuous destruction of the Native American people and the nations of Indian people is the basic justification for the cyclical waves of racial and cultural discrimination to this very day in the United States. Every ethnic group that threatens the privileged power elite has confronted direct and vicious attacks. New immigrants' prejudice began with English settlers who directed their scapegoating against other Europeans, charging them with attempting to seize the colonies for the Roman Church. In the westward push for the so-called Promised Free Land, the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the ceding of nearly half of Mexico's territories to the United States set the stage for the race relations in the Southwest. At the California State Constitution Convention in 1849, and later in the state legislature, bills were introduced to prohibit the immigration of free blacks into California, claiming that, quote, it would drive the poor and honest white laborers from the field by degrading him to the level of the Negro, unquote. These same arguments about immigrant workers are being made today about the specter of a non-white majority that, quote, threatens to take away the jobs from the, quote, American people, as if America belonged only to a privileged few. Despite these attacks, we, people of color, have overcome hundreds of years of racism and discrimination. We have developed strong systems within our communities, and most importantly, we have waged mighty struggles to bring about change. We have brought about change, the abolition of slavery, the civil rights, the women's rights, and we forced the government to end the Vietnam War. Of course, the Vietnamese people had a lot to do with it, but the American people also had played an important role in stopping and ending the war. One of the greatest challenges that we face is to work to build multi-ethnic and multi-issue coalitions. We have lost important battles because we are too divided and too dispersed. Unfortunately, we allow tactical differences or differences in focuses to weaken our ability to strike strategic victories. That was the case in '94 when we worked on the 3 strikes proposition and the 187 proposition separately. We divided our efforts and we lost. We are all struggling to achieve the same goals, for meaningful jobs, for adequate health care, for quality education, for affirmative action, the environment, And we are all working to empower our communities. We are all working for peace with justice and democracy. And we can all achieve these goals only if we work together. The Latino community this very day is discussing the same issues that you have just discussed earlier in your panel. I just came this morning. I spent all morning working with the California Latino Civil Rights Network. And we are also dealing with the question of empowerment within a multi-racial and multicultural society. And we need to, the same things that you're discussing here, we're discussing them over here. So how do we get together in dialogue to identify a unified agenda? So, because if we work dispersed, it's like a hand. You don't have much force. But if you work together, like united, like a fist, then you can make us a strong hit, right? So, respecting our differences, but moving forward and keeping in mind always that el pueblo unido jamás será vencido, that the people united will never be defeated. Gracias.
안녕하십니까. 미교협 설립 2주년 기념 심포지움에서 제가 소수민족 커뮤니티 연대를 위하여라는 주제로 여러분들과 만나게 된 것을 큰 영광으로 생각합니다. 미국 역사를 돌아볼 때 이민자들과 가난한 사람들에 대한 혹독한 인종차별적 공격을 감행하는 것은 그다지 새로운 일이 아닙니다. 과거의 미국 역사를 공부하고 이해하는 것은 오늘의 현실을 올바로 이해하는 데 있어 매우 중요한 일입니다. 실제로 끊임없이 아메리카 원주민과 그 국가들을 파괴시켜온 행위는 오늘날까지 계속되고 있는 온갖 인종적, 문화적 차별의 근원인 것입니다. 약속된 자유의 땅을 찾기 위한 서부 대륙 진출이 본격적으로 이루어지면서 구아달루페 이달고 협정을 맺고 당시 멕시코 땅의 절반을 미국에 양도한 등 일련의 사건은 미국 남서부의 인종관계를 규정하는 서막이 되었습니다. 이런 공세에도 불구하고 우리 소수민족들은 수백 년에 걸쳐 인종차별과 분리정책을 극복하여 왔습니다. 이 과정 속에서 우리는 바로 우리 커뮤니티 안에서 매우 강력한 지지기반을 마련해 왔으며 무엇보다 중요한 것은 우리들의 힘찬 투쟁을 통하여 변화를 이루어온 것입니다. 우리는 노예제 폐지에서부터 민권 신장과 여권 신장을 이루어냈으며 또한 우리 정부의 압력을 가해 베트남 전쟁을 종전시키는 데 공헌한 바 있는 것입니다. 우리들이 직면하고 있는 가장 큰 과제들 가운데 하나는 여러 가지 사회적 문제에 올바르게 대응할 수 있는 다민족 연합체를 만드는 것입니다. 너무도 갈라지고 분산되어 있었던 탓에 우리는 그동안 중요한 싸움에서 실패를 경험한 바 있습니다. 불행하게도 우리는 전술상의 차이와 초점의 차이 때문에 역량이 약화되고 그에 따라 올바른 전략적 승리를 못하게 되고 말았습니다. 한 예로 지난 1994년 삼진법과 주민 발의안 187을 별개의 문제로 대응함으로써 우리의 역량을 분산시켰으며 우리는 따라서 실패하고 말았던 것입니다. 우리는 모두 같은 목적, 즉 보람된 직장, 충분한 의료 혜택, 교육 수준 향상 등 모든 문제를 놓고 함께 노력하고 있습니다. 우리는 모두 커뮤니티의 권익 향상을 위해 일하고 있으며 평화와 사회정의 구현 그리고 민주주의를 이루기 위해 힘쓰고 있습니다. 서로 다른 손가락들이 하나의 주먹으로 굳게 쥐어졌을 때 큰 힘을 내듯이 우리 모두가 서로의 다름을 존중하면서 함께 뭉친 사람들은 결코 패배하지 않는다는 것을 믿고 일해 나갈 때 비로소 우리의 목적은 모두 이룰 수 있을 것입니다. 여러분 감사합니다.
We will go on with the next speaker. Her name is Chonghwa Hong. She is the executive director of NACASEC. Chonghwa has worked in many Asian American community issues. Her past positions include the Immigrant Rights Project Coordinator of the Young Korean American Service and Education Center. She was also the assistant to the director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. She was also the research associate of the Korea Information Project. Chonghwa will talk to us on the topic of Election 96 and the Korean American community.
저희가 권익 형성을 위해선 정치력 신장을 해야 되고 그러려면 선거에 참여해야 되는 얘기가 많이 있습니다. 그래서 이번 선거가 끼친 영향 등 이번 96 미국 선거와 동포사회에 대한 그런 발제를 듣는 시간을 갖도록 하겠는데요. 발제를 해주실 분은 홍정아 미교협 사무국장이십니다. 여러분이 너보다 잘 아시겠죠? 그리고 굉장히 성공적으로 끝냈던 워싱턴 포스트 광고 캠페인의 그 코디네이터기로 했고요. 그다음에 다양한 그 아시안 아메리칸 및 지역 사회 관계 활동을 해오셨습니다. 홍정아님을 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Now that we've changed our name from Service and Education Consortium to Service and Education, I guess we have about a month before the elections of 1996, and the election holds a lot of significance for the Korean community. The Korean American community is coming of age as an immigrant community in America. We are one of the fastest growing ethnic communities, and our role and participation in the economic, cultural, and political arenas are rapidly expanding and changing today. And today I would like to just touch on some of the key questions concerning the Korean American community's political participation in the context of the 1996 elections. The three questions that I would like to explore today are, the first question is, how can we realize our political potential as an ethnic minority? Second is, what is the relationship between race and politics? And finally, third question, how will the controversy around immigration and immigrants affect the Korean American community and our political behavior? These are obviously very difficult questions, and these are questions that we need to continue to address as we work toward political empowerment of our community. So the first question, how do we realize our political potential? I believe that the ultimate gauge of democracy, some people say it's voting, or how much freedom of the press, or individual rights are allowed. But I believe that all those things, ultimately, what matters is the ultimate gauge of democracy is the level of the society's, the members' political awareness. And that's what translates into actions such as voting. That's why election is not a separate event. It's part of a political process, a cycle. We need to create a healthy cycle of raising awareness through education, forging community consensus, and monitoring elected officials and giving them direction, and bringing them to making them pay attention to the community problems. That's how we energize democracy. That's how we give it life. Part of the reason election becomes such a one-time event and voter registration activities are not linked with other political education is because probably it is the fastest way that one gets rewarded. Elected politicians reward those who worked on their campaigns and those who they think brought in the votes by appointing them to government posts and giving them access in other ways. Conversely, political parties and politicians won't allocate resources and funds to cultivate constituencies that they don't think vote in large numbers. In trying to answer the question how to maximize our political potential, we need to look at an interesting phenomenon of how I'm just going to allude to this, Americans look at other governments. Americans often look down on other repressive governments that explicitly prohibit free political activities, but at the same time, the American system, a lot of the people, the process is there, but the participation isn't. When the opportunity is available, people still do not participate, and so the result is the same, lack of representation. If you look at the percentage of registered voters and people who actually vote in American elections, as of 1994 figures, majority of Americans did not vote. Fewer than 50% of Americans voted. something's profoundly wrong with our society when citizens willingly forego of their right to vote and their right to voice their opinions. Another thing that we need to understand in trying to figure out how to maximize our potential is the dynamics of political marginalization. We're not only marginalized by being a numerical minority, but also because our issues themselves are marginalized in the political debate. Often minority communities just cast a vote on an agenda decided on by somebody else. And often our issues are minimized as just racial or ethnic issues. Also for Asian Americans, political marginalization is twofold. We're not only marginalized by the mainstream majority, but there have been instances where we're marginalized from the very civil rights agenda and the civil rights community that's supposed to include us. An example is, Ward's Cove case is a perfect example. When Civil Rights Act of 1991 was passed, there was a small section that exempted a number of Asian, Pacific American, and Alaska Native workers from the civil rights standards of the Civil Rights Act of 1991. How ironic is it that the civil rights bill that's supposed to protect the rights of minorities create a smaller subgroup and discriminate against them? So those are some of the dynamics that we need to overcome and address if we are to maximize our political potential. The second question is the question of race in politics. What is the relationship? What should be the relationship? How we answer this question is very crucial because the race issue has been exploited in the mainstream politics, very much exploited in politics. And too often, our issues are distorted as a result. We see that happening around the debates around immigration and affirmative action, and we saw that in the way that people talked about the Los Angeles riots. The mainstream media projected the LA conflict as primarily an interracial conflict and tried to contain the problem within the minority community. At the same time as this mainstream distortion, members of minority communities also have exploited the ethnic and racial loyalties, particularly during elections. We're all too familiar with Asian American candidates who milk the ethnic community for money and votes, and at the same time pushing for an agenda that is ultimately counter to the interests of the Korean American community. They make the appeal solely based on ethnic and racial grounds, and it works because many people feel so politically disenfranchised that they want to feel this common bond. For those people, political marginalization is so deeply rooted emotionally and psychologically that they do not make a political decision to support a candidate based on objective decision, but based on emotions, to support somebody who they perceive is like them. For immigrants, this kind of tendency is a lot stronger than as, for instance, non-immigrant African American communities. Because compared to African Americans, Asian Pacific Americans have many more layers of ethnic bonding that overshadow political differences. African Americans have the skin color and the common history of oppression and struggle in common. As powerful as those factors are, Korean American immigrants, for instance, have, in addition to that, the same language, a totally different culture, the same homeland. These are not just additional factors, but these are the very factors that sets off racist or discriminatory experiences. With the level of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment that persists today, it's no surprise that immigrants feel almost an instinctive mistrust of those outside of their communities. For example, many Koreans feel a stronger bond with other Koreans with different politics than with a non-Korean, or maybe a white person with totally different, with actually sympathetic policy positions. I had several examples, but I'll skip them. So we see that happening with Korean congressmen, just by being invited to a banquet or being able to shake hands with the Korean congressman, some Koreans feel more included somehow than in other settings. The last question is the issue of immigration, the debate around immigration and how this affects our political behavior and how we can use this issue at this particular time. Many of us are aware that the Proposition 187 and the ensuing welfare reform bills and the immigration bill constitute one of the biggest anti-immigrant legislative waves in recent history. Many Korean Americans are still dumbfounded that this is really happening. Korean elderly people have come to our centers in tears and told us that they are contemplating suicide. Because once their SSI is cut off, there are no alternatives for them to survive, and they're too old to learn English, to go through the hurdles that lie before citizenship tests. In fact, last month in Philadelphia, one disabled person hanged himself when he learned that the state and the federal government was going to cut off his benefits. This is a tragic situation for millions and millions of people, including tens of thousands of Korean Americans. So in many ways, these anti-immigrant attacks have had a profound effect on the political consciousness of Korean Americans. The initial reaction to Proposition 187 was lack of interest. Most Korean Americans, including Jay Kim, said that it was a Mexican issue. It was an issue just about illegal immigration, that it had nothing to do with us. But NACASAC started our work back then, 2 years ago. We said that it's about all of us. So we started conducting intensive education and outreach campaigns, saying that the attacks will flow over to legal immigrants and citizens and all people of color. In Los Angeles, we were successful in convincing the Korean media to come out and take an editorial position against Proposition 187. This is a very rare phenomenon. But we're able to do that, and we believe as partly a result of our work, 63% of Korean Americans who voted ended up opposing Proposition 187, which is significantly higher than the 50% for average Asian Americans who oppose Proposition 187. And just as another recent example, last month, NACASAC and affiliates and our many volunteers gathered almost 17,000 letters from the Korean American community within a span of about 10 days, right after President Clinton announced that he was going to sign the welfare reform bill. And we delivered them to the Clinton-Gore campaign office, demanding a restoration of immigrant benefits. Through this letter-writing campaign, although we're 0.5% of the United States population, we got the most number of letters on this issue. So we got the attention of the administration, which responded by having the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, call NACASAC personally. So we felt the effect of our organizing. She asked to hear about the Korean American community's concerns about the welfare reform bill. And we were very proud that we were able to tell her about our concerns as a result of our outreach work. And eventually, a section on the immigrant rights was included in the Democratic Party platform towards the end of August. When we saw the earlier drafts, it was not included. but that was one of the things that we demanded of the Democratic Party. And so we see it as a significant political victory. These are some of the few examples of how the political process and the cycle can be worked. We took advantage of the campaign season and people's sensitivity to our message, and we delivered our message, and it worked. Anti-immigrant attacks are coming from all directions, through legislation, through anti-Asian and anti-immigrant violence, bogus research, and just discrimination at the workplace, hospitals, schools, and just about everywhere we go. It has become a country where you are illegal until proven legal. And that's an experience that not only ourselves, but even American-born second-generation people have to go through constantly. But at the same time, if we can rise to the occasion, we can engage the Korean American community in a healthy political activism. We at NACASEC tried to form a politically coherent and a comprehensive response to the anti-immigrant trends and not a knee-jerk response. We conducted intensive education and outreach on this and other election issues. We held seminars on immigration and immigrant policy. We worked in coalitions with other diverse minorities, especially sectors that Korean American communities have not traditionally worked with. And right now, we have just published and are distributing 50,000 copies of Guide to 1996 Elections, a handbook in the Korean language that contains information on not only the political process, but analysis of some of the major issues involved, and a comparison of the two-party platforms. All of these things may not be the fastest way to elect a Korean to Congress, or it may not lead to a high-level appointment right away. But we believe it is the surest way to political empowerment. And in the end, the sustained political education will lead to higher voting rates and higher level of political participation. So in this way, we try to seize the opportunity to politicize our community, to raise the collective political consciousness of our community. Just as the African American community went through the civil rights movement, and that movement politicized the entire community, and just as the fight for redress for Japanese Americans led to the politicization and the political empowerment of Japanese Americans, we at NACASEC feel that immigrant rights struggle is the challenge that's posed before us today that could politicize our entire community. And little by little, we can start to change the political landscape in the Korean American community.
I want to thank Jung-ah for her presentation, and I would again ask for your understanding. We will forego of the Korean text of Jung-ah's presentation. We will make that text available to you. It is all done. All we have to do is Xerox it.
I spent all that time cutting it.
I know, I'm sorry, but we are really crunched on time. We will now move to our question and answer period.
예, 여러분 죄송하게 됐습니다. 자꾸 시간을 짜려하고요. 죄송한데요. 여러분들이 영어를 다 이해를 하시니까 저희가 죄송하지만 우리말 발제 내용은 저희가 프린트된 카피로 준비가 돼 있거든요. 아주 완벽하게 준비가 돼 있습니다. 그러니까 그거를 나중에 필요하신 분은 받아가시고요. 우리말로 다시 발제하는 건 저희가 생략하는 걸로 하고요. 다시 질문 시간으로 그냥 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. Remember, this question and answer period is not going to have vice versa translations, okay? We will accept questions. Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to say that there are more things, you know, I wasn't comparing the degree of solidarity, but there are many things that immigrant communities have in common, I think, that is distinct from what people have traditionally talked about when they talked about, you know, the relationship between race and politics. So we don't just vote for the Korean person. I mean, I shouldn't say we. Koreans don't just vote for a Korean person because of just the skin of their color, but because of the common language, common homeland, and those other elements that are distinctively characteristic of an immigrant Asian community. So, and those things are very powerful links because they're used against us. The fact that some of us don't speak English is sometimes the reason for discrimination. Sometimes the fact that we're foreign born is another reason for discrimination. So there's just a whole host of those other things that people believe, because if somebody else has those factors, if it's a Korean politician who is foreign born and who speaks Korean and who's familiar with the Korean culture, it just leads people to believe that that person naturally then will be sympathetic to my interests, when that's not always the case.
I think there was another question.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to see a lady from CISPES, right? Okay. What was the name again?
Well, CISPES, my name?
Yes.
Okay, it's Angela, you want to say it in English? Angela.
Oh, Sobrano.
Angela Sobrano.
Only because I've kind of done some study on the modern history of El Salvador and the deep political repression which it underwent with the complicit support of the United States. I'm looking at certain neighborhoods in New York City where I'm from, in Brooklyn in particular, where after the police killing of certain individuals, the commonly held rights of peoples of an entire neighborhood were totally dissolved. They did not exist. And this particular part of Flatbush in Brooklyn was put under police state surveillance for as long as there were grassroots activists who would dare to challenge this killing. And my question to the Korean community or to Nagasaki is, are we going to be educating people as well as the possibility of such civil rights not existing at all at certain periods of time in which, if the state wishes to, it will repress entire communities of people at will, and that there is no possible legal alternative to overcome this. There have been forums held by certain council people within those communities. They have yet to even come up with the pictures of these police officers, which was one of the I mean, that is the level of like disempowered. I mean, that's the nature of how disempowered these people are, that they could not even get their council people to request the 3 photographs of these police officers who shot this unarmed man 24 times and was like totally swept under the rug. Is that also a nature of civil rights, you know, that will be, that should be something that's educated and talked about, you know, that it may not exist sometimes, even if we do fight for it and elect people into power.
Well, I think that that's exactly what, you know, educating the community is about. First of all, there are some certain the Bill of Rights, you know, of this country, and that under those rights you have the freedom of not being persecuted or you know, or attacked by the state without having some kind of justification. But we see those rights being violated every single day. We have immigration, for example, going into apartment buildings right now without any kind of justification and doing raids of people. We have INS going into factories and taking hundreds of workers at one time, and many times without asking whether the worker is a resident or a citizen. It's just because of the color of your skin. So these rights, these civil rights, are constantly being violated. So not only do you have to teach people that there are certain rights that you have, it doesn't matter what color, what religion, what race, or what gender you are, but also how do you protect those rights. And this is why having civil rights networks are really critical.
If I could elaborate on that a little bit, you asked about what are the legal alternatives. I think this debate around immigration has been very interesting around, legal, illegal, and whatnot. I think one thing that we need to keep in mind with these civil rights, when we're talking about civil rights or civil rights movement, is not losing sight of the human rights. Sometimes people get embroiled in what is legal and what is illegal, and things get very kind of complicated. But we have, as we work for the rights of immigrants, or our civil rights, we always have the ethical, higher ethical principles in mind and human rights in mind also. So I think we do need to be ready for any and all kinds of situations, and really not, sometimes when people talk about the rights of undocumented immigrants, or the whole issue of illegal immigration, they don't link it to civil rights because they think illegal immigrants have no civil rights because they're illegal. But I think those are some of the things that we need to challenge by looking at the different connections and how it relates to human rights and other ethical issues, and asking ourselves, we as a society, this is something that we have to address.
Boy, you have been a really, really disciplined audience. I am very, very surprised and very thankful. We are going to bring this plenary to a closure and move us into the banquet. We live in a very frightening times, but also very challenging times. All those things that have been set up here cannot be done. Basic number one, Korean American community empowerment cannot happen without you. It takes people to move history. And at this time and this juncture in U.S. history, the Korean American community and the nation really needs you, each one of us. And thank God we already have a national organization that can coordinate us, give us resources. But that national organization is only good in as far as we use it from the local level. So if anything you get to go away from this conference or this symposium is how important each one of us is in the coming months and years ahead. Thank you very much.
짧은 시간에 여러 가지 협조를 해주셔서 정말 감사합니다. 짧은 시간이었지만 저희가 많은 것들을 배운 시간이었습니다. 발제들을 잘 들으셨겠지만 저희의 장기적인 전망 속에서 저희들의 권익을 옹호하기 위해서는 조직이 필요하죠. 근데 저희에게는 이미 낙하색이라는 조직이 있습니다. 여러분 기억하시겠지만 2년 전 저희 낙하색 창립 기념식 및 심포지엄을 가졌을 때 우리들을 한번 생각해 봅시다. 그때 저희는 이런 좋은 자리에서 이런 옷들을 입고 있지 않았죠. 물론 그것이 돈이 많이 생겼기 때문이나 그런 것들이 아닙니다. 저희들이 그렇게 낙하색이 발전을 해왔기 때문에, 성장을 해왔기 때문입니다. 그런 낙하색이 성장을 해오게 될 때까지는 홍정화 사무국장님이 일을 잘해서라기보다는 저희가 있었기 때문입니다. 물론 일을 잘하시죠. 우리가 있었기 때문입니다. 여러분들이 없었다면 오늘의 이런 성장은 결코 있을 수 없는 것입니다. 여러분, 저희 코리안 커뮤니티의 권익을 보호하기 위해서, 그리고 더 나아가 아시안 커뮤니티, 더 나아가 소수민족들의 커뮤니티를 보호하기 위해서, 그것은 곧 정의로운 미국 사회 건설을 의미하는 것입니다. 여러분들이 필요합니다. 여러분, 우리 모두 같이 손잡고, 그리고 소수민족, 다른 타민족 형제들과 어깨를 걸고 다시 한번 힘차게 발걸음을 내딛어 봅시다. 감사합니다.
Instructions as we move towards the banquet. We would ask for your cooperation in keeping time. We're going to have cocktail hours outside where you went for your break period. The cocktail hours will be between 6:50 and 7:15. At 7:15, we will begin our meals in this room, and we would ask you to find the seats and the tables that were assigned to you before. If you have any questions, you could go to the registration desk and they will be glad to help you. Thank you.
저희가 자꾸 시간을 자른 이유가요. 저희가 6시 50분부터 7시 15분까지 칵테일 아울이 마련되어 있는데 거기에 참석하기 위해서 벌써 많은 분들이 와서 기다리고 계시거든요. 그러니까 6시 50분부터 7시 15분에 있을 칵테일 아울에요. 여러분 이미 그 테이블 번호가 정해져 있고 저희가 알려드렸습니다. 혹시 모르시거나 궁금하신 점이 있으면 그 등록처에 문의하시기 바랍니다. 이상입니다. 감사합니다.
팁 가있어요? 풍선 잡을래? 잡아. 예를 들어 나가 신부름 가서 해서 여기다가 한 번에 붙였습니다.
형은 먼저 들고 다니니까 빠르셔. 형은 먼저 들고 다녀. 먼저 들고 다니냐.
누나 우아해 보인다. 왜요?
선미야, 어디 데리고 가는 거야? 얼마나 돼? 맞아, 가봐.
가까운가? 10만이 안 되는데 거기 그 거주하는 일이 아니고 지상가에서 그러면은 그 농구들은 대체적으로 뭘 해요?
아, 이거 정말.
미야 3인조 상대를 장악하고
아.